guys. Thanks for coming to my show.
Excuse me. Oh, sorry.
I want to read my statement, but also, like, you can read it, so I don't want to be redundant. But I have learned what art making means to me, and for me, it's about unmaking more than it is about making, and like unlearning and growing. And I had to learn what my style was and how it was different than what I like to look at. And so for a while I struggled with, like, I keep making art that I don't want to look at. But then I realized that it's not about the art at the end, it's about the process of making it. So in all of my work, I like to think that you can see like multiple layers of steps. Like I like the underpainting to still be coming through because it's not about finishedness. It's about openness, and like everything in here is finished, but like it can also keep going. Like nothing is ever done. I'm not done growing. So yeah, that's all I have to say. But if you have questions, ask away.
Can you say anything about being not done growing and being part of growing things in your other work?
Okay. So if anybody doesn't know, I'm a farmer. I work in an urban farm in the summers. It's all about regenerative agriculture, which has taught me so much because we use everything the next time. And a really big part of our sustainable practices is composting, which I wrote about in my statement, which I think like connects to growing and art making, because it's like not a nice process. Like it smells so bad and it's like slimy, but then you make this like really rich soil and it's really cool. And you're not wasting anything, and you're like actually giving back to the earth. So instead of like using up the resources, you're replenishing them and getting what you need. So I feel like for me, I'm trying to make art making like that for myself. Like making art in a way that replenishes me. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, like, especially for people who are here who don't make art, talk a little bit about, like, sort of reprocessing, or like, what is the compost process in art? And it probably looks a lot of different ways, right? Mm-hmm. But like, if you were to point out a piece in this space, like what has been sort of reprocessed? What has gone through that decomposition and then is now in the process of like regrowing something else?
Okay, this is actually a really great time to talk about my collaborative piece.
Okay, do that.
So this piece of fabric was actually part of the bed skirt, right? It was part of a bed in my grandparents' old house. And I took this piece because I just liked it. And so it used to be linens, you know? But now it's like the canvas for my next project, which I've been experimenting with fabric lately and quilting and collaging with fabric. And so my hope for this is that I'll use the shapes and lines that people make, and I will collage fabric on top of it and create like a quilt pattern out of the shapes that come out of it. And so, like along with that, every piece of art that I make influences the next one. I hate sketching ideas for paintings and drawings because I know it's not going to be that at the end. So I'm like, what's the point? Because what's really important to me is just letting things become what they're going to become. So sometimes that looks like ripping up old paintings or drawings and then using them for the next one, or like working into them or gessoing over it, which is white paint basically, and then like using the lines that come through to make a new picture. Yeah. It's just like taking one piece of a previous project and pulling it into the next one.
Can you talk a little bit about how that process informed your big piece on the front wall with the eyeball? Because I know a lot of that was that same process.
Well, that painting was a lot of different things. Like, it started to become a lot of different things. And I would just paint over it and take what came through every time that I decided it wasn't what I wanted it to be. And then I just started seeing shapes in it and pulling them out. And so, like, that's a little bit of, like, it was one painting and then it was another, and I used some of the shapes from the previous painting that pulled through to make the next one. And just kept adding until it became, and painting over and sanding. And so, yeah.
Martha, you were talking at one point of doing a show that was more film-oriented. Maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think it's still here, but I think having you describe that might be helpful.
Okay, I'm trying to think of. So both of my grandmothers are big fabric people. What is the word for that? But they both have, yeah, right? They both have really big rooms full of fabric. And it's been a part of my life since I was little. Like, I learned to sew when I was very little. And so it's something that's always been there in my relationship with my grandmas. And so in the last few months, I pulled a bunch of fabric that I liked from both of their collections and, like, kind of mixed it together. And started sewing it together, like, using techniques that I learned, but then also not. And so I'm, like, following and breaking the rules of sewing, which felt cool because it was like I'm using this craft that I was handed and these materials that I was handed that, like, directly go back to my grandmother's, and I'm creating this new thing with it. And so it was a project that was going to be about, yeah, it is about the same thing. It's taking what I'm given and it's using it to make the next thing. And so, yeah, it's still happening. It's about, yeah, connecting and furthering along.
Generational.
Yeah, generational and relational and heritage. And trying to process that, what that means for me.
Does anyone else have a question?
If you don't right now, I'll hang around and you can ask me questions when we're not all just standing here like this. I prefer that.
Thanks.